cut regional services like this, we're essentially saying we're turning out the lights in parts of our country. And nowhere else could I think of the effects in my isolated communities on the James Bay coast. Those communities are served by Wawate Cree Radio, where the communities speak to each other. But their only ability to speak to a much broader context is through CBC. So when St. Anne's Residential School in Fort Albany burnt to the ground, it was a story that everyone in our region shared because CBC was there. When 2 young men burned to death in a jailhouse fire in Saskatchewan, CBC brought that story to the nation. And yet now, 2 years later, when we're actually having the hearings on what happened to those 2 men who burned to death in that makeshift jail cell, we wouldn't have the budget to have CBC Sudbury cover that. In fact, one flight now for Saskatchewan, if CBC was to do its job, would probably wipe out CBC's budget for the year in Sudbury because there is no money to do these services. So by having these cuts, it has to be really understood. The lights are going out in certain parts of our country. The ability of certain parts of our regions to speak to one another are being turned off. I was at a little community event in the little community of Kennebec, Ontario, Highway 65 West, and an elderly woman came up to me and she said, if these cuts go ahead at CBC Sudbury, how will we speak to each other? Because in that part of Northern Ontario, the one unifying voice is the CBC link. So the cuts that are happening are profound and cannot be underestimated. So let's, Madam Speaker, let's talk about how we got here. CBC is the most underfunded public broadcaster in the world.